Where a man is wired completely different, he'll not talk. So since he's not talking, that's kind of working for him and against him because he's not that squeaky wheel. So no one is noticing. Like men can go into such a deep depression and no one knows because literally what looks like depression for men is silence. It's internalizing. And that's also kind of what we do. So do you see like the fine line with that? So a man can be suffering and no one knows because, oh, this is how he always is. So that's why I say men too, because the mental health of men has to be a priority for society.
Welcome to the Mindset on Resilience podcast. I am your host, Daniel Truelove, and I am excited for the guest that we have today. As you know, here we're all about building more confident, resilient, and mentally strong communities. And the guest that we have today is an expert as it relates to that. He is a faith based professional, licensed counselor. He is world renowned as an international speaker and a best-selling author. He is someone that I know personally and have followed his journey for a long time. And just to see all the different phases, very much so a multifaceted individual, all I can say is this: you can't put him in a box because everything in every role that he operates, one of the things that I know for sure is that he operates with a spirit of excellence. I'm excited for the opportunity to glean from the wisdom that he's about to share with us today. And so, without further ado, I'm excited to introduce our guest, the most amazing Dr. Joshua Smith. How you doing, man?
I'm good, man. How are you? Good to be here.
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. I'm excited for us to have this conversation. You are a highly sought after individual. So the fact that you are taking this moment in time to sit down with us today, I'm completely honored. And I appreciate your time and definitely appreciate what you are going to provide for us, on this podcast.
Yeah, it's my honor to be here, and I'm ready for this conversation.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And so one of the things I would like to start with is let's go with the name, Dr. Joshua Smith. You have gone on a journey. You've been a licensed counselor for a while, but then you sought to obtain the title of doctor. Tell me a little bit about that education journey and why you decided to pursue furthering your education.
Yeah, so that education journey was intense. 2% of the population earns a doctorate. So that should tell you a little something about how difficult it is. So I'm glad to be in that 2%. I really went back because I wanted to further my education. I'm an avid learner. I consider myself a lifelong learner. And so I wanted to become even more proficient in the area of counseling and not just be a master's level counselor, but to become a doctoral level counselor. And I felt that by doing that, that I would be able to help more people in more ways. And so I'm grateful for the journey. It was a long journey. It was a faith-filled journey, but it is over. It's done with, and I'm happy to be Dr. Joshua Smith.
We're happy that you've gone on this journey as well, and that you're able to serve at the highest level. Part of the 2%, man, that's an amazing category to be in. But let's talk about we're talking about counseling, man. On this show, we go deep as it relates to mindset, mental health, talking about resilience, and uh, as a counselor, man, I would assume that you've dealt with the whole gamut as it relates to uh, different challenges that people are facing. So, what exactly do you kind of focus on? Do you like have a specialty as it relates to counseling? Tell me a little bit about your practice.
Sure. So my focus is has been on depression, anxiety, trauma, grief issues, and issues related to spirituality. Kind of my target audience, not by my choice, but just by, I guess, divine providence, has been Black men. So for the past 2 years, I've seen an influx of Black men coming into therapy, wanting help with those areas, right? Depression, anxiety, trauma, spiritual issues, childhood issues, grief, all of those things that traditionally men are seen to kind of suppress, not really deal with. But I've seen an influx, and I'm glad about that. Again, it kind of just happened. And it happened to the point that when I did my dissertation for my doctorate degree, it was on actually Black mental health, Black men's mental health, how to treat depression from a faith-based perspective. So I ended up turning it into my dissertation. So those are kind of my areas of focus. Of course, I see other people, but Black men are becoming more and more popular, so to speak, in my practice.
That's interesting because historically, that hasn't been, the population that is apt to seek out help. The old adage, men, supposed to be strong, don't show those weaknesses. And so, tell me a little bit more about that. The Black men's mental health. What are some of the your findings that you've been able to discover on your journey of Black men's mental health? And there are Black men that whether they're educators or just in general that tune into this podcast, and I just so happen to be a Black man as well. And so I would love to go down this journey with you of how we can, take those masks off and be open and vulnerable, transparent as it relates to depression. We talk about anxiety, and even going back to those childhood traumas that is can be difficult to unpack, but leads to us now repeating behaviors versus kind of leveling up and going to the next level within our lives.
Yeah, so I made a post on Instagram that's getting a lot of traction today and a lot of comments from Black men because I asked the question, what are some ways that families, romantic partners, society can better support the mental health of Black men? Because that is really a challenge, as you already mentioned, because of cultural things and just other barriers related to Black men in general. It's kind of hard to talk about and really make headway with. And I will say this, that I believe everybody is responsible for their own mental health, right? We're all responsible for maintaining that. However, there are always these social and cultural and economic factors that play into that. One thing that I've discovered, because as you said earlier, like it's kind of a stigma, Black men don't really go to therapy, don't really open up. I found it to be different. I found it that Black men actually want to go to therapy. They want to have safe places, safe spaces. They want to be vulnerable without it being weaponized, which is big for men in general. But what I've discovered is Black men tend to want counselors, providers that look like them. So I believe that that has been like the secret sauce to my success because I am a licensed professional and I'm also a Black man. So I feel like that has caused me to make a lot of headway because it's about representation. So when these men see that, there is another male who is not just a male, but is a professional, then they're more apt to open up because they feel another level of safety.
Yeah, that's good. And there's identity. You spoke to that representation, but there's like an inherent understanding that takes place when look across from you, and well, he can probably understand if I was to share this with him. Now they may come in a little bit masked, or they may come in maybe a little bit hesitant. So is it that they immediately come in, and because of the representation, that they automatically open up, or are there still walls that still need to be kind of like torn down in order for you all to get to the depths that allows true healing to take place?
I'm going to say that there are still walls, but there are walls with doors. Okay, there are walls with openings because, as you already stated, when a person sits down and they're looking across at a person that looks like them, which is not necessary, right, for counseling, but it is a preference for many. So when you sit down and look at another person that looks like you, automatically in your head, you have the assumption, good or bad, that they can somewhat understand where you're coming from. Right. So even though there are walls that exist, the fact that you came into the room and no one made you come in, there's a door, right? There are openings. And my job as a counselor is not to come in knocking down your walls. My goal is to look for those openings, right? for those doors so that you can open that door a little bit wider, and emerge from behind that wall. Because the truth is, a wall is designed to keep people out. It's also designed to keep you in. So when you begin to open that door, right, it says, okay, I feel safe enough to come out. So again, just by sitting in the room, by signing up for a session, that's saying to me that that person has some willingness to start opening that door.
That's good. That's good. So you said this: men want to open up. Men desire to have these conversations, but what they don't want is for their information, their trauma, their truth to be weaponized. Tell me a little bit about what do you mean by weaponized for those that may not understand, the nuances of weaponizing trauma, pain, or even information that's being shared.
Yeah. So when I say weaponize, what I mean is when you express something you like for it to stay in that safe space, number one, but also to stay in the context of that safe space. So if I were to see you, if you were a client, for example, and I were to see you in Walmart or at a church event, there would be no discussion about what you talked with me about. Not only because I'm a licensed professional and I'm ethically bound to certain ethics and to certain regulations, but just because there's an understanding that I won't bring that up again, right? Because we're not even in the context of my office. We're not in the context of the healing space. If I can even transmit that out even more broadly, I feel like that men want to know that even when they express things to family, to friends, to their romantic partners, that it's not something that's going to be brought up later and used against them, right? Especially in like heated moments. So that's another example of being weaponized. So if someone told you something and then in the heat of a moment you bring it back up with the intent to harm them, then now you have taken the information that they've shared and you're weaponizing it. And chances are they're probably not going to ever share anything intimate with you again.
Right, right. No, that's really good. And so, so if I, hey, share something, deepest secrets, and then, I hear a family member, talking about it or asking me a question about this, that makes them revert back or maybe even, in a sense, remove the doors that were there and replace that door with a wall. Would you agree or disagree with that? Okay. So now let's talk about those individuals. Obviously, you have a ethical obligation to not share this information outside of this. But wife, brother, sister, cousin, mom, dad, how can our circle of influence, our family, our loved ones, operate with that same level of integrity that a counselor does, so that men don't feel like I'm weak for sharing this, or feel like this is going to be utilized in a space or outside of the context in which it was released to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. And as a layperson, so to speak, you may not be bound to those ethical obligations, but I would encourage a person to bind themselves to what has been called the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So if you don't want that information that you share to be shared with others, if you don't want it used as a weapon against you, like don't sow that. Never sow anything that you don't want to reap. So in my profession, we would call that empathy, right? Because I can empathize with you, I can feel where you're coming from, I can put myself in your shoes, so to speak, and I know that I wouldn't want that for me. So I'm not going to be the person to perpetrate that. So just a little bit of empathy and some manners will help people that say, "Well, I'm not bound to these professional ethical obligations," but you are bound to your status as a human, right? Your humanity, your integrity, right? And so you wouldn't want that done again to you. So don't do that to other people.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So I don't know if you ever tune in, but you scroll social media and everybody has a relationship podcast. Everybody's talking about this, that, marriage, boyfriend, girlfriend relationship, this, that, and the third. I don't remember the name of the podcast, but there was this one to where this woman got up there and she was talking about, how do I deal, with a man that is more sensitive, than I am, and so she was talking about this, and the lady, gave a little bit of a response, but the reason why I preface that question in that way is that um, what about this whole mantra, this notion that man equals strength and vulnerability, transparency equals weaknesses? And so, how can we, as black men, as men in general, as a society, like not continue? And even in this case, this was somebody that was romantically in a relationship with somebody, but now saying that when you do this, you're weak. So now, in my mind, if I hear that, if I express myself, I'm vulnerable, but now society and everybody else is saying this is a weakness. How can we like dispel that myth? How can we take that out of like a societal norm and bring it back to like, hey, this is not weaknesses. This is actually a strength to be able to do this.
Yeah, let me answer that two ways. So I feel like when we continue to have conversations, such as what we're having now, those conversations tend to move the needle, so to speak. Like they tend to move us along. But on the other hand, I would discourage individuals from being so concerned about dispelling myths and changing the culture. Now, again, we all can make small steps and we do what we can, but the responsibility for humanity or for a particular race shouldn't be on your shoulders. Does that make sense? So there are some things that you can contribute to, but feeling like I have to be the one to dispel that, or I have to be the one to help completely turn that ship, that's too much of a burden. Like there has to be a collective effort and a collective understanding, which I believe comes primarily through conversations. So for the individual, what I would say is you're not in control of the entirety of humanity or your race or your culture or whatever, but you are in control of your sphere of influence. So there's some things that for you can be a non-negotiable. So what this means, and I heard Michelle Obama say this on an interview about romantic partners. She said something like this. She said, "Pick better." So if you want a certain reality, you can't control what's going on out here, but you can control what's happening in your space. Does that make sense? So if it's a romantic relationship, so to speak, and you're dating, and it is getting serious, and you start to notice that, hey, I'm not. This person is calling me sensitive for sharing, or they're saying that weakness. That's what we now call a red flag. So now you're in control of your environment and you're able to say, hey, that's a non-negotiable for me. So now we're not having a conversation where we're into this relationship and you're calling me sensitive and basically gaslighting me, right? We don't have to have this because I already weeded that out in the process. Does that make sense? I can't be responsible for the things outside of me. But when it comes to my space, when it comes to my friend group, right? When it comes to my mentors, people that I connect with, associate with, we have to understand that as individuals, we definitely have control of that, and we don't have to allow certain things to be.
That's good. But you mentioned something that I would love to dive a little bit deeper into. And you said not one individual is responsible for carrying the weight of an entire group of people on their backs. But since we're talking about black men's mental health, there's this thing called the black tax, to where one person becomes successful, one person achieves something, and there's like this inherent responsibility or this feeling that I'm responsible for not only everybody in my family, everybody in my community. Like there's this weight that I carry on my shoulders that I'm responsible for making sure that things are different for them. So this black tax is not just a economic one. It's a mental. It's so many different facets that come with it. But you just stated that like, hey, you are responsible for your circle of influence. How can we kind of get away? Like you said, we're not into dispelling myths, but how can me as an individual say, hey, I did this, I accomplished this. My sphere of influence is what I have an opportunity to impact, but I'm not going to carry the weight of my entire community, my entire people group on me, because, like you said, that weight is just too much for one individual to carry by themselves.
So I would say number one is closing your ears to that. So closing your ears to those discussions, not being involved in those discussions, because many times, particularly in our community, we want to engage in the discussion. we want to engage. It really becomes an argument, like because we're used to that. It's barbershop talk, it's beauty shop talk, right? So we're used to the back and the forth, trying to prove our point, right? But you have to separate yourself from that. Not saying that you completely isolate yourself from your community. That's not what I'm saying. But there are certain conversations that are conversations that you don't want to get involved in. And here's why you don't want to get involved in it, because you know that the argument is not going to change their mind. So why waste energy and waste time going back and forth when this person or these persons have come to the table already with preconceived notions. They've come to the table with their set of opinions and they're very hard, they're very rigid. Why would you have that back and forth? So that just plants seeds of doubt in your head, like, well, maybe I should, be responsible, because you're just engaging in this back and forth. Somebody's going to wear somebody down, right? I would say is that as successful people, it is important that successful people go to therapy. And it's important that successful people go to therapy because success has certain levels of trauma associated with it. And part of the trauma is when you have reached a certain level of success and you start feeling that obligation to pull people up. But while you're pulling them up, it's also pulling you down. So you have to be able to wrap your mind around, this is something new, right? This is a transition. The transition I made was from wherever I was to success. And so you really need to get in therapy and work on your mindset around how you handle success and what success means to you. So successful people must go to therapy because there's a whole new mindset that's associated with success.
And I just want to kind of dive a little bit deeper into that point because you're speaking about not getting into the conversation, like just avoid it. It's you can't change their mind. It is what it is. But I think underneath that there is I would say probably a desire or a search for whether it be relevance, acceptance, significance. And so now hear this great information that you're sharing with me about not engaging in the conversation, but yet even though successful, there's some insecurities maybe somewhere underneath there that don't allow you to just disconnect or remove yourselves from those conversations. And what you mentioned earlier is dealing with traumatic experiences that now maybe have us in some conversations, now having some responsibilities that shouldn't be ours. So how let's dive into that. How can we process our trauma in a way to where we're healed, to where we have boundaries that are set up within our lives and feel comfortable when those hard knows, it just is what it is. This is my non-negotiable, and I'm not engaging with it.
Yeah, the only way to process trauma is to process trauma. So, what I've discovered, particularly in the Black community, African American community, is that there are many things that are trauma that we don't recognize as trauma. So, self awareness is the first step to healing. If I'm not aware that this is traumatic, right? This was a traumatic experience, and not not continue to normalize it. Like, this is just kind of what we do. This is just kind of how my family is. But being able to recognize, which is why therapy is really good, because in therapy, oftentimes people find themselves making excuses for their abusers, excuses for certain systems. Well, that's my mama. That's my step, whoever. And yes, they are that, but you also have to be able to look at that multidimensional. That even though they are that, they also cause some injury. Doesn't mean that you hate them. It just means that now you're able to see that there was some toxic behavior there. There were some trauma wounds there, and they probably didn't even start with them. It was passed down from somebody that was raising them, right? Somebody that was involved with them. But it's very important, it's very critical and pivotal that we take the time to recognize things that are traumatic. And when we begin to recognize it, that's when we're now more in a better position to be able to process it, to be able to move from it, to be able to, like you said, set up the boundaries. These are my non negotiables because now I understand, hey, that wasn't okay. That was trauma. But the first thing we got to do is recognize that this is trauma.
But we're gonna go here, right? Let's go here because I think some people are, whether you want to admit it or not, what you're saying right now is that we have to accept the facts for the facts. So if your parents, mom, dad, guardian, whatever that family dynamic is, did something that was traumatic for you, uh, we have to identify that. We have to call trauma what it is. And just because it's your mom, you guys say, "Oh, that's my mom," or my grandparents did that as well, and so that's just how we are. I hear it all the times in our community. Talk about whether it be because there's this dynamic with whether you should whoop your kids or whether you should gentle parenting. And now you got, well, no, that ain't a black thing. Y'all raising some soft kids, and now there's this no societal norm that says this is how we're supposed to navigate this. It's a monolith. Nobody can deviate away from the way in which we parent, and if you're not, then you can't identify as this right here. It's like, so I'm not black. My skin doesn't make me black for the simple fact that I want to go a different route. So talk to me about that process of like saying that, hey, I can call my mom or my dad or whoever it was. I can call out a behavior as traumatic, still love them and appreciate them, but that's necessary.
It's necessary for your healing. It's necessary for you to even be open to look at alternatives, right? To look at new paths. Because here's the truth: we all have to make our own way, so to speak. We all have to make our own decisions, live our own lives, and that's heavily influenced by your family of origin. But it doesn't mean that you have to copy the same patterns. And I always ask people, when that was happening to you, we can just use corporal punishment since you mentioned it as an example. When that happened to you, did it work for you? Or how well. So why would we continue something that doesn't work just because it is what we do? So someone has to make up their mind to break that cycle. Like, this is not the only option that we have. And let's study this out to see what are the real effects of this, and how has this helped or not helped. Let's look at all of that. But if you're so enmeshed, so to speak, in your family of origin and what they do, and you're married to certain methods, then again, back to what I was saying earlier, you're not going to be able to point out like this wasn't okay, this was trauma, etc., and you'll just continue to repeat it.
Mm. So somebody has to go on this journey of growth. You know, one of the things that I think from my experience is that my father was a lot like my grandfather in the way in which they raised us. My grandfather was raised in the South in Alabama, country town. His father was raised in that same area. My parents live in that area, and somebody has to go down this journey of saying, is there another way, or is there something else out there as it relates to what we desire out of life, as it relates to the process and the way in which we're going to kind of nurture our family? Like, somebody has to desire this growth. And so, talk to us about this journey of growing, even though it's a journey that you may be the first person that has gone down this, and therapy may be one of those steps to experiencing the growth that you need.
Yeah, I will just say, as a bit of an encouragement, that it's an honor to be first. It's an honor to be that person that says, this is how this has been going in my family for maybe centuries, but I'm going to be the first one to start making this change. So how do you want your life to be? Is what I would ask. Like, what do you want out of life? Do you want the same things? Because if you repeat the same patterns, you're going to get the same things. So every generation should be getting better. If we're only repeating what previous generations did, then we're not getting better. Right. So if you are the first, I would say go ahead and embrace that. And I would say embrace it because it's a difficult thing to embrace, because that may lead you to be the one that is the odd person out, to be ostracized, to be criticized, all of that. And that's okay. But still, I say it's an honor to be first.
Yeah, it's an honor to be first. I love it. I ain't gonna lie, I had to. Thought I was back in church. I hit the oh, glory. Oh my goodness, that's rich. So one of the things that you've been talking about, outside of this being an honor to be first, you did mention earlier, and I'd love to unpack that what about creating safe spaces for men. What is a state? What is the process of creating a safe space for a man look like?
That process is fairly simple. I know we often use that terminology and it sounds very nuanced, but it's really not that complicated. The first step that I would say for building and creating safe spaces is to listen. And it doesn't get more simpler than that. Like, just listen, because men have often felt as if their voices will not be heard, so they don't speak, or they feel that if they are heard, that it won't be valued, so they don't speak, or if they do speak, then it's going to be weaponized, as we talked about, and turned on them. So the best way to create that space is to just listen. Another way to create that space is to create it first among other men. So having a community of men that you excuse me, feel safe with, vulnerable to a degree with, that you can share some things, and it's a collaborative discussion. It's a collaborative type of group, like that will help to get that person in the mindset, right? Get that man into the mindset of there are safe people out here, right? And if there's only two or three, I can start changing my mindset and wrapping my mind around the fact that I can share, right? I can have someone to listen and I can listen to them. But it all starts with listening. If we're not listening, if we're listening to speak, or if we're listening, to twist it or to turn it, then that's not creating a safe space. But that's for anybody, any race, any sex. Like, there has to be some listening, because that allows for that vulnerability to come forth.
That's good. That's good. One thing that I would like to interject right here is that uh, a response or a habit is a response that is triggered from safety. So one of the things you just mentioned was that I have a voice, or I share my opinion, but then when I share it, you don't listen, or when I share it later on, it becomes weaponized. So silence is safety. It's not preference, it's safety. So if there's a man in your life and he's quiet, he's somehow identified that my me not having a voice is the safest place that I can be. So can we kind of, identify the environment that they're in, or can the person that's also in that environment, whether it be wife, whether it be girlfriend, family members, if this man doesn't have a voice, at what point did we not make that space safe for him?
Yeah, that has to be a real conversation that the other person wants to have. And even beyond the conversation, that has to be a real realization, right? That there, and that's internal. Like, that's that person being able to say, there's a reason, there must be a reason why this man isn't sharing, right? This man isn't coming forward. There's something to that. And just sitting with that and exploring it for what it is, without blame shifting, right? So being able to say, okay, how have I contributed? That is the most emotionally intelligent, um, healed question a person can ask when they're processing something and it's involving another person. How have I contributed to what I see? Right. And I think if we start with that, then we can start working our way through it from a healthy space and not a space of defensiveness. It's called an internal locus of control. I've already, like, checked me, so to speak, and maybe I didn't find anything. More than likely, you're gonna find something if you actually do, right? But it's that internal locus of control. Before I look outside of me, I look inward, and I question myself, so to speak, and I begin to process, okay, what have I done to contribute to this? Or what can I do to help this turn? And again, that is one of the most emotionally intelligent things that a person can ask themselves. So I would say, to pivot from your example, if someone has a man in their life and that man is no longer talking, or they're talking less, silence, again, it is not the most effective way to handle that, but it is often preferred. So we need to explore why the silence, and how have I contributed to that silence, and or what can I do to break that silence?
While you were speaking, one of the things that came to my mind was, is men's mental health a priority for other people? So you talked about every man or everybody, whether it's not men, everybody has to make their own mental health a priority. That's your responsibility to yourself. But at the same time, culturally, which is something that we've kind of spoken about on a couple of different occasions here, does men's mental health have to be a priority in order for there to be this safe space creation? Because it takes a level of maturity for me to say that I've contributed to the silence. Why the silence? Well, last week or last year or 5 years ago, there's been a cycle within our home of X, Y, and Z. This is a reason why this man is silent. Men's mental health has to be a priority for other people in order for them to take personal accountability. Will you journey down that path for me?
I'm gonna just give you a new hashtag: men too. Men too. So we had Me Too, and I'm saying men too because depending on what you're saying, the undertone of what you're saying is that everybody else has been a priority. Children's mental health, right? Women's mental health. And I feel like it's that thing of, and I hope no women send me hate messages, but it's the thing of like the squeaky wheel gets the oil. So women more often than not, this is a generalization, but more often than not, women are going to talk, right? Women are going to express. They're going to express to someone, what's going on, how they're feeling. So again, they're going to do that. And sometimes it's that squeaky wheel principle where a man is wired completely different. He'll not talk. So since he's not talking, that's kind of working for him and against him because he's not that squeaky wheel. So no one is noticing. Like men can go into such a deep depression and no one knows because literally what looks like depression for men is silence. It's internalizing. And that's also kind of what we do. So do you see like the fine line with that? So a man can be suffering and no one knows because, oh, this is how he always is. So that's why I say men too, because the mental health of men has to be a priority for society. And I feel like we're starting to have those conversations, but not enough of those conversations because it's those squeaky wheels that's consistently getting the oil. Now the squeaky wheel needs the oil, but there's another wheel over here that's stuck. So do we know that this isn't moving like it's supposed to? It's not squeaky, but it still needs oil. So men,
And I'm glad we're on this conversation because it's this silence, right? So we silence. There's internalizing, our challenges, our struggles, but not that outward expression. Statistics tell us that men are more likely to do things like commit suicide than women are. Men are more likely to be silent during the midst of their biggest struggles, whether it be depression, anxiety, just overall hurt, for whatever reason that may be. And I know you would probably have some of the more reasonings behind that. But this whole notion that men are more likely to go down this path of, ending their lives is one that is personally connected to me because I've been someone that, silently struggled. I've been someone that felt like I didn't have, that safe space or individuals that I could speak to about that. And so, if you wouldn't mind talking to me about, the trajectory, if men don't go down the path of going to therapy, if men don't get safe spaces, if men don't take their mental health, and individuals within our communities don't take men's mental health seriously, like what are the outcomes for men not being a priority? Men too.
Yeah. So one of those outcomes is, of course, death by suicide. But before I get into that, there's also anger. So there's anger, which leads to violence, and that can be violence towards others or violence towards self. But it has deep roots in anger because I always tell people, when you bury something, an experience, a feeling, anything like that you bury, which the clinical word is suppress, it doesn't go anywhere, right? It didn't exit. It's going to start to manifest in your emotions, in your behaviors. Like it's still there. It's literally still in your subconscious mind. So that can manifest in anger, health issues. There's a reason why men statistically die sooner than the women in their lives because there's a lot of internalizing. And again, it's not a normal conversation because society just says, well, oh, that's how men are, without digging into the fact that there's a reason that men do this, and how can we better understand that, and how can we prevent them from having physical health problems, mental health problems, anger, negative emotions, violence, which also again tracks back to suicide. So I'm a person also like yourself that has dealt with years ago, suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideations, suicidal behaviors, and part of that was because I felt like I didn't have a voice and that I couldn't express big failures, or what I thought were big failures. It was just a mindset of not feeling safe to share. So for me, this is why I'm very adamant about something that I said a few moments ago. Men need to create for themselves. Society has a role, who's ever in your life has a role, but you as a man, you also have to be very strategic and intentional. That's the word I'm looking for. Intentional about creating that safe space for yourself. And you can create that with other men, with other brothers. I can't tell you the number of times that my brothers have talked me off the edge, sometimes not even knowing it. But me feeling vulnerable and safe enough over time, right? Because it takes time, but vulnerable and safe over time, I say, hey, I'm not doing well. I'm struggling with this. And more often than not, I've found that when I say that, that person will say, I'm also struggling with that. It's like we have all these secrets and things that we're trying to hold in. And then the person that we think is okay is also struggling with that. So now we're in a position to help one another. Does that make sense? If we're not getting it from where we think we need to get it from, sometimes we have to create it. So every man needs an accountability partner, someone that they can lean on, get strength from, and that helps you in those moments where you feel like no one is hearing you. Right? There's someone who can, but you have to create that and begin to reach out.
Man, two things I want to say. Number one, I want to say thank you for the men that were in your life, that were able to, for having a community of individuals that created that safe space for you. You are someone that I highly respect, someone that has had a tremendous impact, not only on your circle of influence, family, relationships, things like that, but on this world. And I believe that it's an attack on manhood to get them out of position to deal with these things silently, uh, which is why I would love for you to talk to me more so personally. Like, did you have a personal process outside of just having men that you could speak to that reminded you of your purpose, that reminded you of the significance and the role and the impact that you see now today and every day that you live, from the legacy that you have as a husband, as a father, as a faith leader within your community? Can you talk to us about the other side of those internal battles?
Yeah. So the other side, I would just sum that up by saying purpose. So when I began to discover what my purpose was, understood that the purpose kept me alive. the purpose kept me, and again, as we've said, along with those relationships, the purpose, was the fuel, to fight another day. So now I know that my purpose isn't done. It's not complete. There's still plenty of work to do. So it's the purpose that's motivating me, right? It's the purpose that's keeping me alive. Also, I would be remiss to say, if I didn't say, also relationship with God. So understanding who my creator was, going very deep into that process of learning who my creator was and what his intent is for my life, right? What is, I say my purpose, but it's really his purpose for my life. So understanding that, building that relationship, strengthening that relationship, like I can go into that relationship mode, so to speak, without having anyone else having access to that. Does that make sense? Like that's a source of power that I can tap into for myself because that's a place that's reserved only for him. But I had to build that over time and even continue to strengthen that over time. David said, if I can give scripture when my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to a rock that's higher than I. That's higher than family, that's higher than wife, that's higher than kids, that's higher than my brothers, that's higher than me, right? So there's a place for that, and when I'm most overwhelmed, that's the place that I go even now. But it's about God, it's about purpose, and then those other elements like you mentioned, such as legacy and the things that I'm responsible for leaving for my family, those things come into play as well. So those things keep me alive.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. I just want to speak really briefly to, since we are having this conversation about men. My wife and I were studying um, the other day, and one of the things biblically we were studying was about the man's role and just seeing a history of blessings, their voice being connected to purpose, their voice being connected to the trajectory of not only individual lives but the lives of communities, the lives of nations. I would like to ask you, why is a man's voice necessary?
A man's voice is necessary because it was the first voice that rang out in the earth. So God says, let there be. He created a man like himself in his image after his likeness that also had the responsibility for being the voice. So Adam picked up the responsibility because the Bible tells us that the highest of heavens, the heavens of heavens, belongs to God. The earth he's given man. So God laid down a foundation, set up a pattern, and then passed the work on to Adam. So now it's Adam's voice ringing out in the earth. It's Adam naming animals, right? It's Adam talking to his wife, right? Until that serpent came in and also tried to have a conversation. So even that serpent, even that piece speaks to the importance of the male voice. Because without that male voice, the serpent now has that authority that it shouldn't have. And now we're off course. So that is the importance of the voice of the man. That was the voice that has rung out from the beginning and still rings out in the earth. So the enemy would love to silence that voice, to keep that voice, not speaking in any way. Because again, back to that serpent, if you don't speak, he'll speak.
You must not listen. You, you must not want this podcast to end because you're talking too good, man. Hey, you're talking too good, man. Oh wow, I gave you this responsibility. Um, and that's a word that I've heard consistently throughout this is that responsibility. Man, it is your responsibility to take your mental health, to take traumatic experiences, to take your life, right? To take your life into your hands and actually do something with it. We can't, continue to pass on that responsibility, even from a community standpoint, passing that book along to not being present, to not being involved as it relates to moving our communities forward. And so, one of the things that we kind of end our segment in was this thing called Better Days Ahead. And with Better Days Ahead, our focus is on encouragement. And since this conversation has been centered around men's mental health, what encouragement, any type of wisdom that you have that you can provide for the men out there that listen to this, what type of encouragement do you have for those? Maybe they're going through a challenging time, or maybe they haven't quite, found their voice, or maybe their voice has been, silenced a little bit. What encouragement do you have for them that there are better days ahead?
My encouragement is simply understand that things do get better. They do get better. But you have to stay in the fight. You have to stay in it, not come out of it, not give up. It's easy to give up. It's easy to say, I'm done with this. But the resilience is proven when you bounce back. It's proven that you have a mindset. And that mindset, things don't have to be going well around you to have that mindset. You're looking forward. You're looking forward to what's better. I've been in some very negative situations, just dealing with life, but I always kept my mind forward. Like, I'm coming out of this to some degree. Like, I have, and this is not recommended, I'm just talking about me. To some degree, like, I've been in things and just really, not recently but previous seasons, like, just numbed myself. For example, I was living in an apartment for 2 years. I didn't even realize it had been 2 years. When I moved out of that apartment, my mom said to me, "I'm glad you're out of there. That was totally beneath you. You were living." But it was because of my financial situation that I felt like that's all that I could do. That's all that I could afford. That's what I can get into, right? But I just plowed through. I plowed through for 2 years until I had saved, and until I had gotten like two promotions on my job and was more stable. I just plowed through, and I looked up 2 years later, and it was 2 years. Does that make sense? So to me, I won't even really use the word numbing because that's a negative connotation. I plowed. I plowed through, and I woke up telling myself every day, "You won't be here always." And it took 2 years, but in my head, it really seemed like a few months because of my mindset. I just plowed through this. Better days are coming. It's about what you tell yourself, not what your circumstances are telling you. So I choose to tell myself, I'm not going to be here always. This is going to get better. Things are going to improve. One day soon, I'm going to be able to move to afford this, and that's how I deal with things. So I'm saying that from experience to just encourage anyone who's watching to keep your mind forward, stay forward, have goals, have dreams, dream while you're in the dark, right? Dream while things around you are chaotic. Still hold on to that dream and you'll get there. Better days are ahead. They are coming.
That's good. Well, thank you so much. We end with the wisdom that we just received from all of our guests. So, for everybody that's out there listening, this is a reminder that it does get better. I was having a conversation just the other day, which connects to your dream while you're in the dark. They said the reason why I have to keep fighting is because this is I'm not living in the vision that I saw in my head. So if my current reality doesn't match that what I saw, then it has to get better. So for everybody out there, this is your reminder to number one, dream. Number two, have that vision. Continue to focus on that even when it's dark. Because if that picture you're currently living right now, that life you're currently living right now, isn't what you saw, then guess what? It has to get better. Dr. Joshua Smith, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate all the wisdom that you dropped. This is another segment of the Mindset on Resilience podcast, and we're out.